A look at John Pombe Magufuli's legacy, and then we shall get into his, the now President Samia Suluhu to find out what it shall be like from our analyst here in studio for her as the first female president of Tanzania and East Africa, and at the same time, why her job is clearly cut out for her. Now, let's just establish from our guests and start with you, Mr. Kioko. That is Joseph Kioko, who is a political analyst. What, in your view, is one of the elements that stand out in terms of the Magufuli legacy?
Well, thank you, Trish, for giving us the opportunity to come here and have this healthy discussion on the way it is. Before answering your question, allow me, because the topical issue today in Kenya is about our kids who are going to sit for their national examination.
Oh, we shall get into that, don't worry.
But first, wish them luck.
Okay,
I am one of the parents who has a daughter doing standard 8.
Wonderful.
And I promise to say, wish her well in her exams publicly, amongst her peers too.
Okay. What's her name? What's her name?
She's called Ivy Kioko.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm on the road kids nationwide.
Good luck to you, Ivy Kioko.
Thank you very much. So in the Tanzanian case, you need to understand, as a country, Tanzania is more a value-driven political ecosystem. Certain things that the incoming president would want to do, it will be driven more about the values and customs of the Swahili culture in Tanzania. And a lot of pronouncements will have to wait a little bit until the funerals is done. In terms of the culture of the late President Magufuli and the political drive that he brought into office, he brought in some freshness of air, some ability of doing away with old traditions, the thing about order, the thing about calmness, the thing about understanding, even though rapid action and radical action needs to be done. You could see the roadside pronouncements that he brought in. He inspects a facility, finds a public officer not available, quickly orders an instruction. Initially, in the short term, that's very exciting, that's very fresh. Over time, you discover that nothing can move until the president or the individual sitting in the office of the presidency decides whether it is good or bad. Now, when you personalize, when you put premium on personalization vis-a-vis institution, what happens is that you tend up being ruled and controlled by the personal whims of that person. What that individual decides to be good then becomes good for the nation, irrespective of the individual interest that that person has. Whether the institutions are there to sustain that or not is a totally different thing altogether. So Magufuli, the late Magufuli, appeared fresh in the initial circumstances, in the initial period that he got in as a president. When you compare him with other African leaders who would make public pronouncements on issues like corruption, who would make public pronouncements on issues of reduction of wastage and duplication of resource utilization, he came forth and he would say foreign trips won't happen. National celebrations will be minimized. Corruptions will be fought on the spot there and then, because it somehow is clear according to his perception. But then over time, and as we moved into the last election last year, we saw the effect of the personalization of this role. The military was strongly under his control. The media houses were being forced to report that which Magufuli allows. Social media networks were controlled and censored. Opposition political parties' organization was stifled, so that democracy in Tanzania was now viewed from the lenses of President Magufuli. Now, his lenses at that particular time was anybody in Chadema, anybody in the opposition party is an enemy and a less patriotic individual. Now, those are the issues that over time need to be relooked at, that he individualized the presidency, he individualized certain things at the expense of developing institutions that can outlast him. If you look at the character of previous presidents, Mwalimu Nyerere, when publicly accepted that his Ujamaa policy had failed, and he stepped down to allow for Mwinyi to come in and drive the nation forward. Look at Mkapa. publicly accepting that globalization as an agenda must be accepted. We however need to accommodate it to our local needs. Look at the late President Kikwete.
Okay.
And the challenges that were there. These people did not personalize rules. They allowed the institutions of governance in Tanzania to flourish. That point of personalization is the greatest disservice that Magufuli did to his people of Tanzania.
All right. Honorable Odera.
I would, I agree with a lot of what Kioko has said. Mm-hmm. I would put it in two, perhaps three ways. Some of the achievements, what we would regard as the achievements of Magufuli in Tanzania, one of which was to embark on infrastructural transformation,
yes,
which would pave way for economic development over time. It's difficult to measure in the short term when you're implementing infrastructural projects. It's difficult in the short term to measure the impact, but I think the impact will be felt over time in the economy of Tanzania. Mm-hmm. The other one is, of course, the less talked about one, which is reviewing and restructuring the relationships, the exploitative relationships with foreign countries and foreign firms. He did that especially in the mining sector, where he reviewed the contracts that the country had entered into previously, and essentially delivered millions of dollars to the Tanzanian revenue body, which over time will help with the development of the country. And you could also talk about fighting corruption,
okay,
even though I think his war against corruption and his war against what he regarded as malpractices, like excessive government expenditure, which he reined in on, created a personality cult. Mm-hmm. That it has to be Magufuli present and saying it and making decisions. Then you wonder, where were the institutions? If the president has to go talking about desks that were not delivered to a primary school, where are the institutions? Mm-hmm. If a president has to go inspecting all the projects and, discontinuing contracts that he deems to have not been performed by the contractor, what has happened to the institutions?
Okay.
I think he would have done a lot better by strengthening the institutions, because then the institutions will have a presence across Tanzania, which the president as a person cannot have. On the other hand, leadership. Peter Drucker did say that leadership is about delivering outcomes. So of all the actions that have been taken, what are the outcomes for the Tanzanians? And I want to point you towards a number of things that are statistical. The African Development Bank usually delivers reports on African economies. And according to the African Development Bank, between 2000 and 2019, the economy of Tanzania grew by an average of 7%. That it means it grew by an average of 7% in the time of Mzee Marehemu Mkapa, mm-hmm, in the time of Jakaya Kikwete, and in the time of John Pombe Magufuli, barring just 1 year, 2020, because 2019 is captured. And therefore, if we're talking about growth, economic growth, just as an indicator, in 2019, the economy of Tanzania grew by 6.8%, the GDP. In 2018, it grew by 7%. So it's not off. Yes. It's really not off at all. It's around the average. And therefore, if you are to credit that average to Magufuli, you must look at the contribution of Mzee Mkapa, and you must look at the contribution of Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete.
And therefore, clarity shall be gotten by looking to the future.
You then need to go into the details.
Yes.
But my point is, Magufuli, in terms of GDP growth, was not outstanding. So we must put him along with the other two guys who also did a fairly good job in terms of growing the economy of Tanzania.
Okay.
The other thing that I needed to say is, between 2007 and 2012, the rate of poverty reduction in Tanzania was 30%. Mm-hmm. Sorry, 18%. Mm-hmm. The rate of reduction of poverty was 18% over those 5 years. Then between 2012 in 2018, the rate of poverty reduction dropped to 6.4%. Therefore, what are we saying? That in Magufuli's time, a lot of that period is within Magufuli's presidency, the rate of poverty, because GDP growth is one thing, but you can grow the GDP while still expanding the gap between the rich and the poor. You can grow the GDP without reducing the number of people living below the poverty line. You can grow the GDP while there is squalor in large parts of the country. So if you want to find a measure that then measures equity, that measures dispersal of wealth and dispersal of the improvement in the standards of living that must come with the GDP, then you must look at things like the reduction in the rate of poverty. Okay. And on that, the other guy, Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete, did a fantastic job reducing poverty on an annual basis by 18%. During Magufuli's time, the rate of poverty reduction was 6.4%. Okay. Which then must send us to the question, was his style working for Tanzanians, the ordinary Tanzanian that suffers poverty on a daily basis? Was it working? Did it work? Did it deliver the outcomes? Did the drama and the pronouncements end up in outcomes that improved the standards of living of the ordinary man and woman? And I think that's a question that deserves a lot of examination. Okay. Now, before we get back to matters education and what's happening with the KTPE examination that shall be happening in moments, let's take a look at Samia Suluhu's the expectations on Samia Suluhu. Or Mr. Kioko, what do you make of that? There's a cartoon, very interesting one on page 14, yes, that actually indicates that she will be having to face a lot of influence from, I'm sure, Magufuli supporters and allies and people who have a lot to say about how she should handle the leadership of that country. So what say you about the possibilities and the direction she might be taking moving forward? You need to understand that in Tanzania, the political party CCM has an overbearing influence on the policy formulation and implementation of the government. Where CCM is today is what KANU was in the 80s in this country, such that the influence of the central committee of the party, the policy directive that they give, will influence how the government moves forward, and therefore will influence in a major way how President Suluhu carries herself. However, this is where the intricacies begin. In the political succession of CCM, Madam Suluhu was never meant to ascend to power. Yes. That's a sad reality. The succession policy was after, or the succession thinking was that after Pombe Magufuli serves his term up to 2025, then a Zanzibaran, and who is the current president, Mwinyi, would have stepped in to fill in the gap. This lady was never meant to be there. So she walks in, and she has the opportunity of redefining her legacy and redefining the thinking of the CCM Central Committee. That in itself will be a major battle that she has to confront in the next 2-3 weeks. Or secondly, play ball, and therefore becomes just a figurehead, and see through the remainder of the tenure of Magufuli, and therefore be instructed to bring in the deputy president, who was a Magufuli favorite, so that people believe that although Magufuli is dead, but long live President Magufuli. Now, those are the things that she must balance. And not only within CCM, but regionally. How will she relate with Kenya? How will she relate with Uganda? How will she relate with the East African community and the SADC bloc? You could remember precisely that Magufuli had no time for the East African community. He had no time, actually, for us, Kenya, as a strategic partner. He felt that by fighting Kenya, then the political, economic significance and value of Tanzania grows. Yeah. He was more leaning towards SADC region for a lot of things that would prosper Tanzania. Now, how does the new president deal with Kenya, for example? On matters of trade, labor relations, monetary policy configurations, how does she deal? That to us will be critical. She has an opportunity either to shape her own vision
on matters democracy. For example, she sat in the committee. You must know that she has been a vice president for 7 years, 6 or 7 years. So she has run, she knows these things. She was in the committee that was established to look at ways in which the constitution of Tanzania could be changed to accommodate certain reforms and progressive ideas. However, that was rejected ultimately by CCM, and that stopped. She has that opportunity now of redirecting that conversation so that certain institutions that, like the Electoral Commission in TZ, become independent players. Press freedom is guaranteed so that the election of 2020 is not marred with violence like the ones that happened in the last one. She has that opportunity. Okay. She has that opportunity of relooking at the COVID pandemic, because that is a hot issue on that table. Will she adapt the non-progressive, tough-talking Magufuli theory that don't wear masks, don't social distance, let's live life as normal, let us put a lot of faith in prayer? Of course, we're all Christians, or we all believe in a supreme being, and therefore we pray, but science also has to play a role. Will she ignore the role of science in the fight against COVID? That's a major pronouncement that people will be expecting of her. Okay. But ultimately, how she manages the minefield that is CCM is what will define her legacy.
Honorable Odera, let's take a look at, let's give the example of the United States, right? We had Joe Biden coming in and immediately signing executive order after executive order, some of them to undo what his predecessor does. So if she indeed is going to go in the opposite direction, wouldn't we have seen some of the elements, some of the signs of that, even as the country mourns and they gather in throngs, at least even masks? We're not seeing any of them in, not a mask in sight at the airport, at the stadium. Doesn't that speak volume to how she's going to lead? Don't you think that indicates she'll just be moving along with what Magufuli had set up?
Yeah. I mean, let's ask ourselves the question, before what befell Magufuli happened, did you even know the name of the Vice President of Tanzania? Yes. She was neatly tucked away in Magufuli's shadow. She has not had any opportunity to assert herself before this, and there she comes. I wish her the best. I certainly wish her the best, being a woman, the first president, first female president in Eastern Central Africa. We are glad that she's got the opportunity, even though it came about as a result of the death of a president. Nonetheless, I think she has a golden opportunity to make a difference in the lives of Tanzanians. You see, these events, you know, starting from the Dar es Salaam event, the viewing of the body in the Uhuru Square, they called it, and then going on to Dodoma, going on to Mwanza, and then Chato, the village where Magufuli was born and where he has his home. The whole process, up to the day the president will be buried, the former president, those are called super spreader events, potentially. Yes. You could end up with a lot of infections arising from the mourning process. If I were that president, if I was Samia, by the way, Samia is a region in Kenya, so we own her. It is in Busia County, so we are proud. If I were her, I would have said something as simple as, please wear masks. Security forces ensure that anybody entering the stadium wears a mask. It is common knowledge that the president, Magufuli, died of COVID. Now,
common but not official.
It's not, but it's common knowledge. That's why I said common knowledge.
Yeah, because even when it comes to the optics, I would want to play devil's advocate and think if this was the stance of the former president, and then you come in and you go in the complete opposite direction, you might be indicating to the people, and you have that level of patriotism, and right now with the emotions of mourning, nobody wants to, even especially in the African setup, nobody wants to cast the deceased in a bad light. Don't you think that's influencing a lot of what's happening right now?
Tricks, sometimes leadership demands that you do the right thing despite opposition, despite skepticism, despite momentum going in the opposite direction. And remember, this is actually about life and death, literally. About life and death. If I were her, that would be an opportunity to send a message that, you know what, that would send a number of messages. One, I am my own person. Number two, there would be a subtle message there that says, you know what, this disease is real, it is here, let us take care of ourselves. And then over time, she can bring around, I think she should just put the almost common sense science of social distancing, wearing masks, washing hands, and then start sourcing for a vaccine to save the lives of Tanzanians. But I think that, and Kioko has alluded to this, CCM, in my view, is going to put this lady on a short leash. I look at CCM and I look at the voices in CCM. There is a gentleman called Humphrey Polepole, who is the ideology and publicity secretary of CCM. When you listen to that guy speak, and I listened to him speak on Saturday, there is something in CCM they call Kamati Kuu ya Chama. I would struggle to translate that in a way that says what that says. Kamati Kuu ya Chama.
National Party Committee.
Something like
executive, executive
it's actually bigger than the NMC. The equivalent of it is not like the NMC that you have in Jubilee. It is bigger than that. It is big. It is made up of a few guys who make decisions, which decisions are then communicated to the rest of the party leadership. And with such structures within a party, with a history, CCM has a massive, strong, and effective propaganda machine. They are going to put her on a short leash. Remember, she's Zanzibari, and they were not expecting her. Remember, there were even machinations. Part of the reason it took long to announce the death of the president, as we know it, it's common knowledge, allegedly. Not official, like you said, and I respect that, allegedly, was there were machinations to try and stop her from being sworn in. So we hear. Because she's Zanzibari, she's a woman, they don't deem her to be hardline enough in the ANC view. So ANC is going to put roadblocks on her way. ANC might try to try to massage the Magufuli legacy. And I think that if we are fair to President Magufuli, we respect the dead, but what he did with COVID, the denialism, the inaction, the anti-science propaganda, and the refusal to even report to WHO, you can only put Magufuli in the same place with Donald Trump and Bolsonaro.
But that's
Brazil.
not exactly how he started out, right?
It isn't.
Yes.
That's how it ended up.
But that's how it ended up.
That's how it ended up?
That's not how it started, because I think even with the war on corruption, there's a level of sincerity that was demonstrated by this president that did not, of course, translate when it comes to COVID-19 and some of the other issues, such as the human rights issues. But at the beginning, there was a feeling of sincerity when it came to some of these issues.
Let's take this example.
That Bolsonaro or Trump did not live
Let's take this example, Trix.
Yes.
When President Magufuli went on air to say we took the blood of a goat, we tested positive. We took the blood of which animal, and did you believe him?
Pawpaw.
I did not believe. I think that was a deliberate effort to denigrate science, to create skepticism about the presence of the virus at all, and essentially to say we are not going to do anything about this. I think, this is my hunch, that he was doing all this to avoid a situation where he has too many things to deal with before the election happens. And then after the election, he continued along the same path. Had he made an about turn after elections to then say, okay, you know, I have received new information, whatever excuse it might have been, and take action against I am sure he would have saved a lot of lives. Now look what has happened in Tanzania. The president is dead. First vice president of Zanzibar is dead. Many ministers have died, and all, according to the information we have, are likely to have died of COVID-19.
Okay, now let's get to one of the biggest stories in the country that has to do with the KCPE exams. And you were mentioning earlier on about the fact that he had, President Magufuli, I'd like to make a link between the two issues, was very, very hands-on when it came to some of these things, going to ministries, sting operations, questioning people about their JD, and telling them when they would fail to actually describe what they're there to do, some of them would get fired. A similar approach is taken by the CS for Education, where he would go to certain centers himself to oversee, and of course we're talking about that fear that the CS might come that would fuel people to actually behave. And there's the contrast of the personality as opposed to the strengthening of institutions. This is something that is going on this morning. Joseph Kioko, I'd like your opinion on that particular approach and what you think should be happening in terms of empowering institutions in the country to ensure that things happen as should be without that very close eye of the CS.
I think initially when somebody gets into a new environment, it is important to stamp personal authority. It is important to stamp or show your political, not really political, but your ideological approach on issues so that people can gauge you and can clearly mark you distinctly different from your predecessors. That is allowed in the first 6 months, 1 year maximum in a job, because everybody is learning each other. But you cannot perpetuate it in eternity. It cannot be the normal modus operandi that for examination or for certain things to happen, you must physically be there to supervise certain things.
Yeah.
You must build institutions over time so that these people that you haven't shown that this is the new way of doing things, you must inculcate that value to them so that whether you are there or not, people believe and carry your vision forward.
Yeah.
Now, what are the challenges we face with this individualized approach? Is that the moment you go, the next person who comes in will also come in with his own new distinct approach.
Right.
And therefore you will lose those gains. Remember some time ago in 2004 when Michuki was the Minister of Transport, and he brought in the issue of safety belts, and he brought in the speedo issues.
Yes.
And at that point, the matatu industry was regulated because of fear of the then Minister Michuki and the rules that were there. But the moment Michuki left, the late Michuki left, and Chirao Makwere became Minister of Transport, it was a downhill, slippery road that we went. Today, matatus don't have the belts. There is no enforcement on belts issues. There is no enforcement on speed governors. Whatever gains that Michuki brought disappeared. Now, it is the same case we are facing today.
Yeah.
There are these initiatives, there are this saying that people are thieves, we need to fight leakages of exams. That was fine. But when Matiang'i was Minister of Education, he fought that thing effectively.
Yes.
We believed in that. I thought by today, the CS of Education should not necessarily wake up at 5:30 to go stand in a container in Kiandutu and want to see that Mwalimu Josephine has been given the bundles to take to a particular school. When he's not there, who will do it? Have we not developed alternative mechanism of distribution of this examination material so that the question of safety and leakage is addressed? None of us is rubbishing or minimizing that exam leakage must not should happen. None of them is, nobody is doing that. We appreciate it. We are just saying we now need to move from point A to point B so that we can get to D. But whatever is happening today in the Ministry of Education, we are just in the same spot that we were 3 years ago. I do not think that is progressive. I really do not think so.
Okay, and remember there are 479 containers strewn across the country. Honorable Odera, what do you make of this approach?
Certainly it's unsustainable. It doesn't even work. It's unsustainable. It is ineffective. It is unnecessarily costly to the government that every time there are exams around the corner, we have to hire choppers and service vehicles and pass vouchers for per diem for officials who are going to move around the country. What is the role of the officials at the county and the district and the divisional level?
Yeah.
There are officials that are responsible for education operations in each of these areas. If we are going to manage on the basis that we are doing things for certain specific outputs, then we will be looking at the outputs. And then, if you look at outputs, government must think that If something is bad enough and we want to spend government money to ensure it doesn't happen, when it happens in someone's area, there must be consequences. And for those who do it extremely well, government needs to think about, if this is important, let's put a premium on it. In government, unfortunately, somebody can have exams stolen in their area, lots of candidates who stole exams, and the officials will get away with it for whatever reasons there may be. That's why you find that high-ranking government officials have to be there to do the job of people who are already employed to do that job at that level. If the cabinet secretary is going to go to Thika, School for the Blind, or whichever school it is, to supervise distribution of exams, who is supervising in a small village north of Turkana County?
Right.
Who is supervising in the most remote village in Kwale, or in Busia, or in Mandera? You can do it. You just have to have a system that works for all the schools, all the candidates, all the officials that are responsible for education. You risk creating personality cults that without the minister being in a certain place, things
Nothing
don't
happens.
move.
Now, Honorable Odera, there's that thought, and then here's an idea. What if these are just which is typical of many people in public office or politicians? What if this is just for the optics, to show, to create I don't know, I don't want to call it a frenzy, but to create a picture of, we are working, this is happening right now, I'm in charge.
Who is the intended consumer of those optics?
The nation.
The nation? The nation is there with the students, believe me. The nation is down there with the candidates. The nation is made up of parents, of teachers, of preachers, who all are interacting with these candidates and wishing them well, praying for them at whatever level they are.
Yeah.
What we are interested in, what parents are interested in, what Kenya is interested in, is an exam that has integrity and is fair to all the candidates, from index 1 to the last index, from the first school to the last school in the register. If that is the outcome we pursue, then we must have a system that works for every school, for every candidate. That way, we will ensure that the results are reflective of the ability of the candidates, rather than have sporadic visits to certain schools where the media is in tow and reporting to us about a very ordinary event in the calendar of life. An exam is a very ordinary event in the life of a candidate. It may be great for the parents. It may be a day when parents want to drive their children to school and pray a long prayer before breakfast and drop them to school and pray in the car. That may be well. However, it should not attract the kind of attention at the national level that it attracts. It only does because there is always a danger of irregularities happening. Now, the outcome the minister must pursue is to make sure those irregularities don't happen. And then you'll find exams attracting less attention at the national level. It's an ordinary event in the calendar. It will pass. Everybody has passed through that. It's a day that comes, it passes. When the results are announced, candidates who are successful will celebrate. That should be the thrust of it, rather than a day that looks like a life and death matter.
Okay, Mr. Kyoto,
maybe
as
a parent to the candidate
yes,
on the date.
Yes. Do you enjoy seeing that kind of authority being portrayed?
No. First, the saddest bit is that we all know it's about PR. That the minister does not believe that without him being there, that people will think otherwise of this examination. Yet he adds no value. I mean, I was wondering, if these things are being collected at 6 or 6:15, how will they reach all the schools in that particular area of Kiambu County or Thika area by exactly 8:30? If we remove the PR thing and people get busy, because what do I expect as a parent? That each child will sit a fair examination, that there is no leakage, nobody will see this paper ahead of time, that the marks that a child gets is the marks that that child is entitled to. And fourthly, we are in the process of demystifying examinations. Let them be a natural occurrence in life. This one is not a judgment of whether you succeed or not. Now, when you and a minister appears on the forefront of distributing this examination, then they acquire a larger than life perspective. You end up traumatizing kids. You end up creating a perception that this is it. This is what defines my life today. Yet it is not the case.
Okay.
Now, those are the pressures that I would suggest that he or the office or the Ministry of Education puts in mechanism of distribution of these things without this PR exercise, downgrade not the significance or the importance, but downgrade this Monday morning shenanigans that we are seeing countrywide, so that it appears like any other ordinary course of the life of a 14-year-old kid that must go through.
All right. Thank you very much. That is Joseph Kyo, who's a political analyst, as well as Honorable Arthur Adera, who's a former legislator. Thank you so much for helping us, bring context to some of the issues that are surrounding the happenings in the country. We have had the running theme this morning is the KCPE examinations that are starting in moments. We had at 6 a.m. the containers being opened. They were overseen in Thika by the CS George Magoha, and we were talking about the leadership approach that he is taking when it comes to some of these matters. Coming up, we shall be taking a look at the newsroom, a segment that focuses and of course revolves on journalism, reporting and resilience, how journalists are managing their mental health, especially issues they cover around their line of work and the toll it takes on them. How can employers mitigate to ensure mental health prevails and goes down? But of course, we shall focus acutely on what's happening on the ground. The reporters across the nation telling us what's happening with regards to the KCPE examinations, the opening of containers, the distribution, some of the challenges that are being faced. And do remember, we are smack in the middle of a pandemic. How is that affecting how schools are going about that, given that there are other challenges that we do face, which include cheating and, of course, the massive number of pregnant girls that schools shall have to accommodate in these year's examinations. Do stay tuned. We have a packed show for you. This is Morning Express.